Liam, a devoted single father, faces his worst nightmare when his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, is taken from him after a false accusation of negligence. As wealthy but emotionally distant grandparents file for custody, Liam battles relentless court hearings, invasive inspections, and the fear of losing Sophie forever. With nothing but love and an unfinished mural that tells their story, Liam fights against all odds to prove he's the father Sophie needs. Will love and determination be enough to overcome wealth and influence? And what sacrifices will Liam make to keep Sophie? The air in the garage was thick with the scent of motor oil and the faint tang of rusting metal. Liam wiped his hands on a rag, smearing grease across his calloused palms. The old clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, counting down the minutes until Sophie would burst through the door, her laughter breaking through the heavy silence that hung over the room. For 8 years, Sophie had been Liam's everything. After losing his wife, Rachel, to a car accident that still haunted his dreams, Liam poured himself into raising Sophie. The world hadn't been kind to him since. Low-paying jobs, endless bills, and the subtle judgment of a town that knew every painful detail of his loss. But Sophie made it worth it. Her joy lit up even the dimmest days, and her talent for painting brought color to the drab walls of their life. The bell over the garage door jingled, and Sophie skipped in, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Daddy," she called, holding up a crinkled piece of paper. "Look what I made today." Liam crouched down to meet her, brushing a lock of her hair away from her face. "What's this, princess?" "It's our house," Sophie declared, unrolling the paper to reveal a bright, whimsical drawing. Their small house stood in the center, surrounded by fields of flowers and a sky filled with stars, even though it was daytime in the picture. Liam smiled, his chest tightening. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." She grinned, her gap-toothed smile contagious. "I'm going to paint it on my bedroom wall, like the mural we did in the living room. After dinner," Liam said, ruffling her hair. "And after homework." Sophie groaned dramatically but hugged him tightly, her small arms squeezing his neck. It was in these quiet moments, holding her close, that Liam felt the sharp ache of his love for her, a love so fierce it made the thought of losing her unbearable. The next day, Liam's world began to crack. It started with a phone call from Sophie's school. Mrs. Daniels, the school counselor, spoke in clipped, polite tones that barely masked her concern. "Mr. Moreno, Sophie fell on the playground today. She's fine, but she needed stitches on her arm." Liam's heart sank. "Why didn't anyone call me sooner?" "We tried," Mrs. Daniels said gently, "but it wasn't serious enough for an ambulance, and Sophie insisted she didn't want to bother you at work." When Liam picked her up, Sophie's arm was wrapped in a bandage. She seemed unbothered, chattering about the brave face she put on at the nurse's office. But Liam couldn't shake the worry gnawing at him. That evening, there was a knock at the door. 2 strangers stood on the porch, a man in a pressed suit and a woman holding a clipboard. "Mr. Moreno?" the woman asked. "We're with Child Protective Services. We've received a report of possible negligence regarding Sophie." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about? She just had a playground accident." The man cleared his throat. "We're not making accusations at this point, but we need to conduct an assessment." The assessment was invasive, reducing Liam's home to a list of flaws scribbled on the clipboard. Too small, too cluttered, not enough structured activities. By the end of the week, the situation escalated. Sophie's estranged grandparents, Jonathan and Evelyn Greer, filed for custody. Liam hadn't spoken to Rachel's parents since the funeral, their strained relationship ruptured by grief and blame. They had the money, the lawyers, and the polished veneer of stability that Liam, with his grease-stained hands and frayed work shirts, couldn't match. "You can't do this," Liam said, his voice shaking as he confronted them outside the courthouse. "Sophie is my daughter. She's our granddaughter," Evelyn replied coldly. "She deserves a better life than this." That night, Sophie sat cross-legged on her bed, painting the first strokes of her mural. "Daddy," she asked quietly, "why are Grandma and Grandpa mad at you?" Liam knelt beside her, struggling for the right words. "They're not mad, sweetheart. They They can help take care of you, but I don't want them to, Sophie said, her brush pausing mid-stroke. Her dark eyes met his, wide and searching. I want you. Liam hugged her, his throat tight with unshed tears. And I want you too. No matter what, we're going to be okay. The weeks ahead were a whirlwind of court dates and home visits. Liam poured every ounce of energy into proving his worth as a father, but the odds felt insurmountable. Sophie's grandparents painted him as unfit, and the social worker's neutral expressions offered little reassurance. Through it all, Sophie's mural grew. Day by day, she added new details. The two of them fishing at the lake, baking cookies in the tiny kitchen, reading stories under a blanket fort. It was a living testament to their bond, a story told in vibrant colors and childlike strokes. But as the hearing date loomed, Liam couldn't shake the fear that it might not be enough. The courtroom felt cavernous, its polished wooden benches and high ceilings designed to make men like Liam feel small. He sat beside his court-appointed lawyer, a kind but overworked woman named Clara, who had warned him to keep his emotions in check. Across the aisle, Jonathan and Evelyn Greer exuded quiet confidence, their tailored suits and calm demeanor a stark contrast to Liam's frayed nerves. Sophie wasn't present, thank God for small mercies, but her absence left a hollow ache in Liam's chest. This was his fight, and he couldn't afford to lose. Evelyn took the stand first. She painted a picture of a family home with acres of green lawns, a live-in nanny, and a private school, ready to shape Sophie into a young lady of promise. Her voice dripped with practiced sincerity as she spoke of her concern for Sophie's stability. She's a bright, talented child, Evelyn said, her hand clutching a pearl necklace. And we only want what's best for her. Jonathan chimed in with a rehearsed nod. Our home is a place where she could thrive. Liam's heart is in the right place, but he struggles to provide the structure a growing child needs. Liam's jaw tightened. His struggles weren't a secret, but to have them laid bare like this, stripped of context, twisted into weapons, made his blood boil. Clara leaned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. Stay calm. We'll have our turn. Back home, Sophie greeted him at the door with paint-smeared hands. I added us playing tag in the yard, she said, tugging him toward her room. Her mural had grown into a kaleidoscope of memories. Her first bike ride, their makeshift Christmas tree, the stars they used to count on summer nights. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Liam said, his voice cracking. She noticed. Sophie always noticed. What's wrong? Liam knelt, looking her in the eyes. Nothing you need to worry about, okay? I just need you to know how much I love you. More than anything in the world. Sophie nodded solemnly, her tiny hands gripping his face. I love you too, Daddy. The Greers weren't content to rely solely on court proceedings. Within days, they sent a social worker back to Liam's home. This time, the questions cut deeper. How do you ensure Sophie gets a balanced diet? The woman asked, eyeing the modest pantry stocked with canned goods and dried pasta. What does Sophie do when you're working late? Have there been any incidents of injury or illness that went untreated? Liam answered as best he could, but doubt clung to him like a shadow. The social worker's pen scratched across her clipboard with unnerving finality. That night, Sophie's fever spiked. She'd caught a cold from a classmate, and despite Liam's best efforts with over-the-counter medicine and cool compresses, she was miserable. He stayed up all night by her side, his worry mounting with every labored breath. By morning, he knew he couldn't handle it alone. He carried Sophie to their battered pickup truck and drove to the clinic. The pediatrician, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, raised an eyebrow when she saw Sophie's condition. She needs rest and fluids, but she'll be fine. Next time, don't wait so long to bring her in. Liam flinched at the unspoken accusation. Word of the clinic visit reached the Greers faster than Liam anticipated. In the next hearing, they presented it as evidence of his pattern of delay in seeking medical care. This is exactly why we're here, Evelyn said, her tone mournful yet firm. Sophie deserves a guardian who can prioritize her health and well-being. They're twisting everything, Liam hissed to Clara. I know, Clara said grimly, but the judge has to hear it. Outside the courtroom, Evelyn confronted Liam in the parking lot. Her perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a crack of raw anger. Do you think this is easy for us? She demanded. Losing Rachel was the worst thing that ever happened to us. And now we have to sit here and watch you. She stopped herself, her voice trembling. I'm her father, Liam said, his own anger simmering just below the surface. You don't get to take her away because you're still grieving. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. And what are you doing, Liam? Working yourself to death while she paints fairy tales on the walls? She's happy, Liam shot back. Isn't that what matters? Evelyn shook her head, her expression softening into something almost pitying. Sometimes love isn't enough. That night, Liam stared at the blank space on Sophie's mural. She had left it for the big picture, she'd said, a future memory they hadn't made yet. But what if they never got to? The thought haunted him as he lay awake on the couch, the weight of everything pressing down on his chest. He was a good father, but was that enough in a world where the odds were stacked against him? Liam sat on the edge of the couch, staring at a stack of legal papers Clara had given him. He could barely make sense of the dense text, the cold legal jargon that turned his life into a series of accusations and counter-arguments. The words blurred together: unfit, negligence, limited resources, each one a fresh wound. Sophie's laughter floated down the hall, pulling him from the depths of his thoughts. She was in her room, humming a tune as she worked on her mural. For the moment, she was blissfully unaware of the storm threatening to tear their world apart. He couldn't let her lose that. The next court hearing brought a flicker of hope, albeit a fragile one. Clara had managed to convince the judge to allow Sophie to speak on her own behalf in a closed session. Liam knew how much was riding on Sophie's words, and the thought both terrified and reassured him. Sophie's honesty was her strength, but would the judge understand the love they shared? The day before the hearing, Liam sat with Sophie at the kitchen table. A dim light flickered above them, and the faint smell of grease lingered from his earlier repairs on a neighbor's car. "Soph," he began cautiously, "you're going to talk to a judge tomorrow. Do you know what that means?" Sophie looked up from her cereal, her eyes wide and curious. "Do I get to wear a robe like they do on TV?" Liam chuckled despite himself, but the weight of the conversation quickly settled again. "Not exactly. The judge is going to ask you some questions about me and Grandma and Grandpa. It's really important that you just tell the truth." Sophie frowned, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. "Why do they think I can't stay with you? Did I do something wrong?" The question broke him. "No, sweetheart. This isn't your fault. It's just grown-ups sometimes think they know what's best, even when they don't see everything." She was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Can I tell the judge about our mural?" "You can tell the judge whatever you want," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just be yourself, okay? That's all that matters." Sophie nodded, her resolve stronger than his. "Okay, Daddy." The hearing room was small, the walls lined with dull gray paneling that seemed to sap the air of any warmth. Sophie sat at the table, her legs swinging beneath her chair as the judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp features, smiled gently at her. "Hello, Sophie," the judge began. "I just want to ask you a few questions about your home and your family. Is that okay?" Sophie nodded. "Okay. What's it like living with your dad?" Sophie's face lit up. "It's the best. We do everything together. He makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches, and we built a treehouse in the backyard. And I'm painting this big mural on my wall. It's about all the things we love." The judge smiled faintly. "That sounds lovely. And what about your grandparents? Do you see them often?" Sophie hesitated, tilting her head. "Not really. They're nice, I guess, but they don't like when I get paint on my clothes, and they don't laugh at my jokes like Daddy does." The judge leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. "And how do you feel about staying with your grandparents instead of your dad?" Sophie's eyes widened, the mere suggestion enough to make her voice tremble. "I don't want to leave Daddy. I love him and he loves me. We're a team." Outside the hearing room, Evelyn and Jonathan were waiting, their expressions unreadable. When Sophie ran to Liam, throwing her arms around his waist, Evelyn's mouth tightened into a thin line. "That doesn't change anything," she said quietly, though the strain in her voice betrayed her. "This is about what's best for Sophie." Liam met her gaze, his voice low and steady. "What's best for Sophie is staying with her father." Jonathan stepped forward, his face flushed with frustration. "And what happens when you can't pay the bills, Liam?" When your truck breaks down and you can't get to work? Love doesn't keep the lights on. Before Liam could respond, Sophie tugged at his hand. Daddy, can we go home now? Yes, sweetheart, Liam said, his voice softening as he turned away from the Greers. Let's go home. The tension between Liam and the Greers lingered, but something shifted after Sophie's testimony. Evelyn seemed quieter, her sharp words replaced by thoughtful glances. Jonathan, however, remained resolute, doubling down on their efforts to gain custody. The days dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Liam threw himself into work, taking on every job he could to cover mounting legal fees. Sophie continued her mural, adding more memories to their story. The time they rescued a stray kitten, their late-night stargazing sessions, the way he danced with her in the kitchen when they had no reason other than joy. But cracks began to form in their carefully constructed world. Liam's exhaustion showed in the dark circles under his eyes, the late-night pacing when he thought Sophie was asleep. And Sophie, ever perceptive, began to retreat into herself, her laughter less frequent and her questions more pointed. Do you think the judge liked what I said? She asked one night as Liam tucked her in. I think you were perfect, Liam said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then why does it feel like they're still going to take me away? Her words sliced through him, but he forced a smile. Because we haven't finished our story yet, Soph, and we don't give up in the middle of a story, right? Right, she whispered, though her voice was tinged with doubt. The letter arrived on a rainy Wednesday morning, its pristine white envelope an unwelcome contrast to the battered mailbox Liam had repaired so many times. Sophie was at school, and Liam was grateful for that. He didn't want her to see the way his hands trembled as he opened it. The words on the page blurred together as he read, temporary custody granted to Jonathan and Evelyn Greer, pending further investigation. The paper fell from his hands. Liam sank onto the porch steps, the rain soaking through his jeans, mixing with the hot sting of tears he hadn't shed in years. He had done everything to prove his love for Sophie, and still, it wasn't enough. When he picked Sophie up from school, she bounded toward him, her hair flying in every direction. For a brief moment, her joy lifted the weight pressing down on his chest. But as soon as they got into the truck, she noticed something was off. Daddy, why are you sad? She asked, her voice small and tentative. Liam gripped the steering wheel tighter, keeping his eyes on the road. I'm just tired, sweetheart. It's been a long day. She didn't believe him. Is it about Grandma and Grandpa? He hesitated, then nodded. The judge thinks you should stay with them for a little while. Sophie's sharp intake of breath cut through the quiet hum of the engine. No, I don't want to go. I'll tell the judge again. I'll tell her that I want to stay with you. Soph, Liam said, his voice breaking. We don't always get to decide these things, but this isn't forever, okay? I'm going to keep fighting for you. You promise? She whispered, her wide eyes filling with tears. Liam pulled the truck over, turning to face her. I promise, no matter what it takes, I'll bring you home. The day Sophie left was the hardest of Liam's life. Evelyn and Jonathan arrived in a sleek black car, their expressions a mixture of triumph and discomfort. Sophie clung to Liam's leg as he crouched down to her level. Remember what I told you, he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. This isn't the end of our story. She nodded, tears streaming down her face as Evelyn gently pulled her away. Liam stood on the porch, his fists clenched at his sides, watching as the car disappeared down the street. The house was unbearably quiet that night. Liam wandered through the rooms, his footsteps echoing off the walls. When he reached Sophie's room, he stopped in the doorway. Her mural was unfinished, the final blank space glaring back at him like a wound that refused to heal. Sophie's absence was a constant ache, but Liam refused to let it paralyze him. He threw himself into work, saving every penny he could for the legal battle ahead. Clara filed an appeal, but the process was slow, and every day felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, Sophie struggled to adjust to life with her grandparents. Their house was enormous, filled with gleaming furniture and quiet, empty rooms. Evelyn tried to connect with her, offering art supplies and encouraging her to paint, but Sophie's heart wasn't in it. I don't know what to paint, she said one day, her voice flat. Evelyn frowned. What about something from your mural? You could recreate it here. Sophie shook her head. It's not the same without Daddy. The tension between Liam and the Greers came to a head when Evelyn brought Sophie for a supervised visit at Liam's house. Sophie ran into his arms the moment she saw him, clinging to him as if her life depended on it. "Daddy," she cried, "I missed you so much." "I missed you too, Princess," Liam said, holding her close. Evelyn stood awkwardly in the doorway, her eyes scanning the small, cluttered living room. "We're here for an hour," she said, her tone brisk. Liam ignored her, focusing entirely on Sophie. They spent the visit painting together, Sophie adding another memory to her mural, the two of them sitting on the porch, watching the stars. When it was time for her to leave, Sophie clung to him again, her sobs breaking his heart. "I don't want to go back, Daddy. Please don't make me." Evelyn stepped forward, her expression softening for the first time. "Sophie, we'll see Daddy again soon, okay?" Sophie shook her head, her tears soaking into Liam's shirt. "It's not the same." Liam kissed the top of her head, his voice steady but filled with pain. "It's going to be okay, Soph. I'm going to fix this." After they left, Liam confronted Evelyn outside. "How can you do this to her?" Evelyn's composure cracked, her voice rising with frustration. "Do you think this is easy for me? Watching her cry like that? I'm trying to give her a better life, Liam, one that doesn't involve constant struggle." "She doesn't need your money or your fancy house," Liam shot back. "She needs her father." "And what happens when you can't give her what she needs?" Evelyn countered. "Love isn't always enough." "Maybe not," Liam said, his voice trembling with anger. "But it's a hell of a lot more than what you're giving her right now." As the days turned into weeks, Liam began to piece together a plan. He couldn't outspend the Greers or match their polished image, but he could show the court something they couldn't. The life he and Sophie had built together, the love that filled every corner of their home. With Clara's help, he started gathering evidence, photographs of their fishing trips, notes Sophie had written him, and most importantly, a portfolio of her mural. Each piece was a testament to the bond they shared, a story told through Sophie's eyes. But the road ahead was still steep, and Liam knew the hardest battles were yet to come. The betrayal came like a thief in the night, swift, unexpected, and gut-wrenching. Liam arrived at the garage one morning to find the doors padlocked and a notice taped to the front. Effective immediately, Moreno's auto repair is closed for failure to meet municipal code standards. His heart plummeted as he ripped the paper off the door, the edges slicing his fingers. This wasn't just his livelihood. This was his chance to prove he could provide for Sophie. He stormed into the town clerk's office, clutching the notice like it was a lifeline slipping from his grasp. "What the hell is this?" The clerk, a weary woman with glasses perched on the edge of her nose, barely glanced up. "You're out of compliance, Mr. Moreno. Inspections were filed last week." "No one said a word to me about an inspection," Liam snapped, his voice rising. "They aren't required to notify you beforehand," she said, shrugging. "You can appeal, but it could take weeks." Weeks. He didn't have weeks. His next court hearing was days away, and without the garage, he had no stable income to show. As he walked back to his truck, the pieces began to fall into place. The inspector had mentioned Evelyn Greer's name in passing, hadn't he? A casual comment about her family's influence in the county. Liam's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. The Greers hadn't just taken Sophie. They were dismantling his life piece by piece. That evening, Liam sat in the living room, surrounded by a growing pile of Sophie's keepsakes. Her crayon drawings, the fishing rod she'd used to catch her first trout, the tiara she wore for her 7th birthday party. Each item told a story, a thread in the tapestry of their life together. But as he stared at them, the weight of his failure pressed down on him. He had nothing left to fight with. No money, no job, no home that could stand up to the Greers' mansion. He picked up Sophie's favorite stuffed rabbit, its worn ears flopping in his hands. "I'm sorry, Princess," he whispered into the silence. The next day, Clara called with news that could either save them or destroy everything. "Liam, I found something," she said, her voice tense. "It's about the Greers' finances." "What about them?" "They've been quietly liquidating assets," Clara explained. "I did some digging, and it turns out they've taken a few financial hits recently. If we can prove they're not as stable as they claim, it could shift the court's perception." Liam felt a flicker of hope, but quickly tamped it down. "How do we prove that?" "I'll handle it," Clara said. "But you need to stay strong, Liam. The hearing's in 2 days, and they're going to come at you hard." When the day arrived, Liam entered the courtroom feeling like a man walking to the gallows. Evelyn and Jonathan were seated with their attorney, their confidence radiating like armor. Clara leaned over to him as the judge entered. "Stick to the truth," she whispered. "Let Sophie's story speak for itself." Evelyn took the stand first, her testimony a polished recital of all the ways they could provide a better life for Sophie. Jonathan followed, emphasizing their resources, their connections, their unwavering commitment to Sophie's future. When Liam's turn came, his heart pounded in his chest. He didn't have their polish or their poise, but he had something they didn't. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I'm not going to stand here and pretend I can offer Sophie the same things the Greers can. I can't give her private tutors or a house with 10 bedrooms, but what I can give her is love and a home where she knows she's safe and wanted." He gestured to a table where Clara had laid out Sophie's keepsakes. "This is our life. These are the moments that matter, the times we laughed and cried and grew together." Finally, he held up a photograph of Sophie's unfinished mural, the blank space at the center glaring back at him. "She left this part empty because she said it was for the memories we haven't made yet, memories she wants to make with me." The Greer's attorney rose, his voice sharp and calculated. "Mr. Moreno, would you agree that Sophie's future requires more than just love? That it requires stability, financial security, and opportunities you simply can't provide?" Liam clenched his fists. "I believe Sophie's future depends on knowing she's loved, no matter what, and I'll fight every day to make sure she has everything she needs." The attorney pressed on, but Liam held his ground, his resolve strengthening with every word. The court adjourned late that afternoon, leaving Liam to wait once again for a decision that felt like it could decide his entire life. Back at home, he sat in Sophie's room, staring at the mural. His phone buzzed, a text from Clara lighting up the screen. "The judge will issue a ruling tomorrow. Be ready." Liam traced his fingers over the blank space on the wall. "Hold on, Soph," he whispered. "We're not done yet." The courtroom was silent as the judge entered, her robes brushing the floor like whispers of finality. Liam's chest tightened with each step she took toward her seat. Today would decide everything. Clara leaned close. "Stay calm, no matter what happened," she murmured. "We've still got options, even if this doesn't go our way." Liam nodded, though her words felt hollow. What other options did he have left? Sophie was his life, his purpose. If he lost her today, it wouldn't just be a defeat. It would be the end of everything that mattered. The judge adjusted her glasses and began speaking, her tone neutral and deliberate. After reviewing the evidence presented by both parties, it's clear this case is about more than financial stability or material wealth. It's about the emotional well-being of a child caught between two worlds. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel Evelyn's eyes on him, sharp and calculating, while Jonathan sat with the stillness of a man confident in his victory. "As such," the judge continued, "I have taken into account not only the testimony provided, but also the character and intentions of each party." She paused, and Liam felt the weight of the room bearing down on him. Before the judge could deliver her ruling, the courtroom door creaked open. Heads turned as a man in a rumpled suit entered, carrying a stack of papers. He approached Clara, whispering something that made her eyes widen. "Your Honor," Clara said, standing quickly, "I request permission to submit newly uncovered evidence into the record." The judge raised an eyebrow. "This is highly irregular, Ms. Price. What is the nature of this evidence?" Clara stepped forward, holding the papers aloft. "This is a financial audit of the Greer estate, conducted independently and dated last week. It reveals significant debts and liquidations that call into question their ability to provide the stable environment they've claimed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jonathan's face flushed red, and Evelyn's carefully composed expression faltered for the first time. "This is outrageous," their lawyer objected, rising to his feet. "These documents are irrelevant and obtained under questionable circumstances." The judge held up her hand. "I'll decide what's relevant. Ms. Price, please continue." Clara explained the findings, detailing how the Greers had hidden their financial struggles to present a picture of stability. "They are not the safe, secure option they claim to be," she concluded. And this deception raises serious questions about their credibility. Jonathan shot to his feet, his composure snapping. We've done everything for Sophie? This is a smear campaign by a desperate man who can't even keep his business running. The judge banged her gavel. Mr. Greer, sit down. You'll have a chance to respond. Jonathan obeyed, though his fury was palpable. Evelyn looked as though she might speak, but said nothing. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The judge turned back to Clara. Is there anything else? Yes, Your Honor. Clara gestured toward Liam. Mr. Moreno has one final piece of evidence that speaks directly to his relationship with Sophie. Liam stood, his knees trembling. He approached the judge's bench with a photograph in his hands. A close-up of Sophie's unfinished mural, the blank space at its center, surrounded by vibrant memories of their life together. This, Liam said, his voice thick with emotion, is Sophie's story. It's how she sees her life. With me, the empty space, that's for the memories we haven't made yet. Memories I'll fight every day to create with her. He placed the photo on the judge's desk. She doesn't need wealth or luxury. She needs love, and that's something no amount of money can buy. The courtroom fell silent as the judge studied the photo. Evelyn looked away, her shoulders stiff, while Jonathan muttered something under his breath. Clara gave Liam a small, encouraging nod as he returned to his seat. The judge cleared her throat. I will take this new evidence into consideration. We will reconvene tomorrow for my final decision. That night, Liam sat in Sophie's room, the silence heavier than ever. He stared at the mural, his fingers tracing the lines Sophie had painted with such joy and hope. A knock at the door startled him. When he opened it, he was surprised to find Evelyn standing there, her face pale and drawn. Can we talk? She asked quietly. Liam hesitated but stepped aside. Evelyn entered, her eyes scanning the modest living room before settling on him. I didn't know about the debts, she said, her voice strained. Jonathan handled all of that. I thought we were doing the right thing for Sophie, but now I'm not so sure. Liam crossed his arms, his voice laced with frustration. You think it's the right thing to take a child away from the only parent she's ever known? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she looked less like the calculating woman he'd battled and more like a grieving mother. I lost Rachel, she said, her voice breaking. I couldn't save her. I thought maybe I could save Sophie. Liam's anger softened, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. You don't save Sophie by tearing her away from her father. You save her by letting her stay with the people who love her most. Evelyn nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now. I just want her to be happy. So do I, Liam said, his voice steady. And she's happiest here, with me. Evelyn didn't reply, but something in her expression shifted, a crack in the armor she'd worn for so long. She turned and left without another word. The next morning, the courtroom was packed with tension as the judge took her seat. Liam's hands clenched into fists, his pulse roaring in his ears as she began to speak. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, the judge said, I have reached a decision. The courtroom was silent, the weight of anticipation pressing down on everyone like a heavy blanket. Liam's heart raced, his hands gripping the edge of the table as the judge shuffled her papers and began to speak. This case has been one of the more challenging I've presided over, she said, her voice measured but firm. At its heart lies the question of what is best for Sophie Moreno, a bright, talented young girl who has been caught in the middle of a conflict between the two halves of her family. The judge paused, her eyes scanning the room. Liam swallowed hard, his gaze flicking to Evelyn and Jonathan. Evelyn looked pale, her eyes cast downward, while Jonathan's jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. In cases like this, the judge continued, we must weigh not only the financial and material resources available to the child, but also the emotional and psychological impact of uprooting her from the life she knows and loves. Liam's chest tightened. Every word felt like a coin toss, teetering between hope and despair. The judge folded her hands on the desk and leaned forward slightly. It is clear to me that Sophie shares an exceptionally strong bond with her father, Mr. Moreno. The evidence presented, including Sophie's own words and the artwork that vividly captures her relationship with her father, underscores the depth of their connection. A murmur rippled through the room, but the judge held up her hand to silence it. That said, the concerns raised by the Greers regarding stability are not without merit. However, the recent revelations about their financial instability call into question their ability to provide the stable environment they have claimed. Liam's grip tightened. Was this it? Was this the moment everything turned? After weighing all factors, the judge said, her voice firm, I have decided that it is in Sophie's best interest to remain in the custody of her father, Mr. Liam Moreno. For a moment, Liam couldn't move. The words didn't register, lost in the roaring sound of his own heartbeat. It wasn't until Sophie's name was mentioned again that the reality hit him. However, the judge added, I strongly encourage both parties to work toward a more collaborative relationship for Sophie's benefit. Grandparents can play a vital role in a child's life, and I trust both sides will make efforts to foster that relationship. Liam's knees nearly buckled as he stood to thank the judge. Clara squeezed his shoulder, a rare smile breaking through her normally stoic demeanor. Across the aisle, Evelyn looked at him with something almost like relief. Jonathan, on the other hand, was stone-faced, his pride clearly wounded. When the hearing adjourned, Sophie was waiting in the hallway with a court officer. The moment she saw Liam, she broke into a run, throwing herself into his arms. "Daddy!" she cried, clinging to him tightly. Liam knelt down, holding her as though she might slip away if he let go. "I told you, Princess. I told you I'd bring you home." Sophie pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. "We can finish the mural now, right?" Liam laughed through his tears, nodding. "Yes, sweetheart. We can finish it together." Before they left, Evelyn approached them. Jonathan stayed back, his arms crossed and his face a mask of disapproval. But Evelyn's expression was softer, almost vulnerable. "Liam," she said quietly, "thank you for letting me see what I needed to see." Liam hesitated but nodded. "I'll make sure she knows you're still part of her life." Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "That's all I can ask." She knelt down to Sophie's level, her voice trembling. "I love you, sweetheart. Never forget that, okay?" Sophie nodded, her small hand reaching out to touch Evelyn. "I know, Grandma." That night, back at home, Liam and Sophie stood in her room, staring at the blank space on the mural. Sophie held a brush in her hand, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What should we put here, Daddy?" she asked. Liam smiled, his heart full for the first time in what felt like forever. "How about us? Standing right here, looking at everything we've done together." Sophie grinned, dipping her brush into a vibrant blue. "Okay." As she painted, Liam watched, the weight of the past few months finally lifting. This was their story, unfinished, messy, and full of love. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like they could face whatever came next. The mural was finally complete. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands streaked with paint, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. The once blank space in the middle now featured a depiction of her and Liam standing side by side, surrounded by the memories they'd created together. Above them, Sophie had painted a vibrant sky filled with stars. "Do you like it?" she asked, turning to Liam with wide, hopeful eyes. Liam crouched beside her, brushing a stray curl from her face. "I love it, Soph. It's perfect, just like you." Her smile widened, and she leaned against him, the kind of simple gesture that spoke volumes. For the first time in months, the house felt warm, alive again. Later that evening, Liam and Sophie sat on the porch, the cool night air carrying the faint scent of rain. Sophie's laughter echoed as they played their favorite game, counting the stars. "There's one," she pointed excitedly. "And another. You're going to run out of fingers if you keep going," Liam teased, ruffling her hair. She giggled, then grew quiet, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Daddy, do you think Mommy can see us?" Liam's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I think she sees everything, sweetheart, and I think she'd be really proud of you." Sophie smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I think she'd be proud of you, too." Liam pulled her close, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks, kiddo." In the days that followed, Evelyn made good on her promise to be part of Sophie's life without overstepping. She came by for visits, bringing books and puzzles she thought Sophie would like, and gradually the tension between her and Liam began to ease. Jonathan, however, kept his distance. Liam wasn't sure if the man's pride or his grief kept him away, but he didn't press. Some bridges, he realized, would take time to mend, if they could be mended at all. One evening, as Sophie worked on a new painting in the living room, Evelyn showed up unexpectedly. She carried a small box, her expression unusually nervous. "I found this in Rachel's things," she said, handing it to Liam. "I thought Sophie might like to have it." Inside was a photo album filled with pictures of Rachel, her as a child, her wedding day, her first moments with Sophie. Liam's chest ached as he flipped through the pages, each one a bittersweet reminder of what they'd lost and what they still had. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with gratitude. Evelyn nodded, her own eyes misty. I want Sophie to remember her mother and to know how much we all love her." "She will," Liam promised. "I'll make sure of it." Months passed, and the shadows of their battle began to fade. Life wasn't perfect. Money was still tight, and Liam worked long hours to keep the bills paid. But their home was filled with laughter, love, and the steady hum of hope. One night, as they sat together reading bedtime stories, Sophie looked up at Liam with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever finish the story?" she asked, holding up a book with a torn cover. Liam smiled, brushing a hand over her hair. "I think our story's just getting started." Sophie grinned, snuggling closer to him. "Good. I like when it's just us." "Me too, kiddo," he whispered. "Me too." The mural in Sophie's room became a symbol of their resilience, a testament to the love that had carried them through the hardest of times. Whenever Liam passed it, he felt a surge of pride, not just for Sophie, but for himself. They'd made it, together. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. No matter what challenges came their way, they would face them as they always had. Side by side, one memory at a time. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to HeroKind Stories and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. What moment resonated with you the most? Let us know.